Hi, and welcome to Hiss and Tell, a podcast about cat behavior and all things cat related. I'm your host, Kristiina Wilson, professional animal behaviorist. Today, I'll be talking to Lilly Ludwig, animal intuitive / animal communicator. We talk about exactly what animal intuition and communication is, how you can do it at home, and a bunch of other good stuff. As a person who's extremely science-based, this was a really interesting episode for me to tackle and talk about. So join us and let me know what you think. Welcome to another episode of Hiss and Tell. I'm your host, Kristiina Wilson, and with me today is Lilly Ludwig, animal intuitive / animal communicator. Welcome, Lilly. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and talk about all things cat communication.
I'm very excited to have you and to have this conversation. So right off the bat, can you explain what is an animal intuitive? And is that an animal communicator? Is it an animal psychic? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, so my business is called Lilly Ludwig Animal Intuitive, but what I do is animal communication primarily. I have other little things that I throw into my readings, but primarily what I do is animal communication. And animal communication is just the telepathic communication between species through mental images, through sensations, through sometimes words. Depending on the animal, they'll actually send out words. But yeah, it's essentially the telepathic communication between species, which I know sounds totally crazy and like, what in the world, is that even a thing? But in reality, I feel that animal communication is a lot more common between humans and their animals than we really even know.
I know a lot of what you're doing is with pets that have passed or with animals that you are not necessarily seeing in person. So can you talk a little bit about exactly how you do what you do and how these things come to you?
Totally, yeah. So for my readings, I don't read behavior. With my animals in my own life, of course, when I'm doing animal communication, I am definitely influenced by their behavior because they're right in front of me. But through the readings that I give, I don't read behavior. I certainly think that all of us as humans, when we are having those little moments of animal communication, we are influenced by their behavior. I think that animal communication, it's a spectrum. It ranges from those moments that you just like kind of know something without really having a reason to know. I mean, if you have ever taken your animal to the vet, even though they weren't behaviorally expressing anything, you maybe just had a feeling that something was going on. Or, a feeling that, if I move the litter box over here, maybe that will improve things. I think that those are all examples of most likely animal communication, and that it can range from those little moments, those little instances, all the way to a 60-minute reading for one animal, communicating ideas for 60 full minutes. So I think that it's a spectrum. I don't think that it is just what I do. I think all of us are doing animal communication most of the time, whether we realize it or not, and that it can absolutely be influenced by the physical things that we are seeing from our animals that we know to be true about our animals. Mm-hmm. In my readings with my clients, I try not to be, if I can see them in the background or whatever, I try not to let that influence the reading because I want it to be I want to trust my intuition and do really what they brought me in there to do. But there's totally times where they'll send me something and I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense with what I know to be true about this species or whatever. And then I'll use what I know to be true to kind of send back to the animal, like, wait a minute, I think I'm getting something wrong here because what I'm feeling from you really doesn't make sense with what I know. And then usually there is some kind of, either I interpreted something wrong or the animal meant something different than what I initially thought.
Right. So I know you said that when you're getting these messages or you're communicating, you're not necessarily doing it in words, you're doing it in feelings or pictures. When you're sending ideas back, are you doing it in the same way? Is it also sometimes words? Is it just feelings? Is it something that's like you're not able to really describe in words how you're doing it?
Yeah, it's mostly, at this point, because it's like I'm almost like fluent in animal communication, I don't really think about it. I'm just kind of sending the ideas out. Depending on the message, depending on the animal, like say I send something out to them and I can tell that they're kind of confused, I'll be a little bit more intentional and like actually really visualize, like, okay, this is what we're talking about, the litter box in this part of the home versus this other part of the home. So it depends on the message, but like day to day with stuff that's, maybe an easier or more simple message for them to understand. Sometimes I'll just speak out loud and just kind of trust that like they'll get the vibe of what I'm saying. And they, for the most part, they do. Again, it depends on the message, it depends on the animal, but especially with my guys who I talk to every single day, I just speak out loud to them and they usually figure it out.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I think most of us, I mean, obviously we're not animal communicators, but I think most of us spend the day talking to our animals. I know I do. I'm just like blabbing all the time, and I'm sure they're like, please shut up. please shut up now, lady.
That's a really common thing. People will say like, oh, can you tell my animal this message from me? And the animals will be like, yeah, I know. Like, you already told me that like 10 times. So they're listening. They really are listening to you.
Whether or not, especially cats, they choose to agree with and or follow your message, I think is a very different thing. So how did you discover that you had this ability? How long have you been doing this? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into becoming an animal intuitive?
Yeah, so I've been doing animal communication since I was a kid. My first memory of realizing I was doing animal communication was when I was 9 years old. I started riding horses, and I would just know things about them before I even showed up to the barn. And it started as just kind of like a weird coincidence. I'd be like, oh, this horse I was going to ride today is not feeling well, so I'm going to work with this horse instead. But over time, I kind of was like, okay, this is probably different than what I've been conditioned to believe about animals. I grew up pretty involved in the animal world, so I'd heard of animal communicators when I was a kid. I had a concept of what it was, and I kind of, put the pieces together. I was like, okay, I'm probably doing animal communication. So I really had experiences from the time I was pretty young. Growing up, I mostly just used it to help my siblings understand our pets, help me understand my pets. When I was in high school, college, I kind of started giving readings to friends and friends of friends, people who were interested or had a specific question, because I was really involved in horses at the time, or I'm still involved with horses, but at the time, that's kind of where I started reading for my friends who had questions about their horses. And then I started my business when I was in college, because I had enough interest from the people in my life. I was like, I'll just kind of set something up to make things, if there is interest. At the time, I had no idea that there would be this much interest in animal communication, so I really didn't think it was going to go anywhere. And by the time I was finishing school, I really had enough interest that I was thinking more seriously about pursuing it after college. I thought my plan when I was in school was to do part-time something in the animal science world, and then part-time animal communication, because I just didn't think that there would ever be this much interest in it. And fortunately, when I graduated, shortly after I graduated, I was able to kind of do my business full-time. So that was in 2020. I've been doing my business full-time since then. And it's been the coolest life experience ever. I'm so I say I'm grateful that the animals pushed me into doing it, because it was kind of them who were encouraging me along the way to do it, because I've just gotten to meet so many cool animal people. When I started this, I felt like there was no one in the world who cared about animals as much as I did. I felt like I was constantly up against people who just didn't really care about animals' feelings, or care that animals, have things to say and stories to tell. And I've learned from doing this job that there's a whole world out there of people who really, really care about their animals and care about doing right by them. And even over time, even in the last couple of years, I've seen the pet industry change quite a bit. People are really interested in doing right by their animals, whether that's in the world of animal communication or in the world of, behavior shaping and stuff like that. But it's been such a cool experience to get to just connect with other humans. As much as connecting with the animals has been life-changing, having the human side of it has also been really life-changing.
Of course. I think it's really affirming. I noticed that when I started my practice also, because I came from a completely different industry. I worked in fashion for 20 years, and then I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, what would be like a nice job that's being of service but working with animals? And that's when I went and got my master's and switched to working in behavior. And it really is so rewarding to work with people, because you're in essence, what I do is I'm really training the people. I'm not training the animals, because the animals are always training us anyway, right? Like, so I'm training the people essentially, but it is so rewarding to work with people who do really care and really are invested in their animals and really are so happy when a problem is solved, and it's nice to be of service in a positive way. So I totally get what you're saying, that it's a very rewarding job, I think, working with animals in this kind of positive space. You mentioned your undergrad that you were going to go work with animals in a different capacity. Were you studying animals in undergrad, like some kind of animal science?
Yeah, so I got my degree. It's a Bachelor of Science in something called Human Animal Studies, which is like the study of human-animal relationships. And that was my first introduction into like the world of animal science, which was also so life-changing and so cool, and like something I'm so grateful I pursued, because growing up I wasn't good at sciencey stuff, and so I just didn't think that was going to be a path for me. But to get to be in this world like where people wanted to clinically understand the relationship between humans and animals, that was super cool experience. And I think again, just more like affirming the fact that our relationships as a society with animals are changing, not the fact that there's this whole field of people that want to like clinically understand, why do we have these relationships with animals? How do we have better relationships with animals? It was really cool, and it definitely, that experience definitely shaped my decision to pursue animal communication as a career, for sure.
I can understand that. I've never heard of that. Does it fall under like sociology or anthropology or psych? Do you know what umbrella it falls under, that field of study?
Yeah, when I got my degree, it was like super new. The way it was sort of presented to me through my school was that it was a subset of animal science. I've also heard, like, I went to a conference when I was in school, and I also heard people calling it anthrozoology, like anthropology.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So my guess is that the industry or the field is still figuring it out. Is this an animal science or a human science? And maybe it's both right now. I'm not sure. That's how it was kind of presented to me when I got my degree.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I don't know why I'm like, I must categorize this. That's stupid. I'm curious also, because I think for me going through behavior school, let's relate everything back to me. Like, but it's weird that like my degree in animal behavior is under human psych, right? And we were like in the human psych department, and it just always felt like very strange. Like it should have been part of animal sciences or something more like that, but they just kind of shunt you into a dark corner of human psych grad studies. And I was like, this isn't, I feel like with a lot of animal work, you just get like shoved into the dark corners of whatever kind of human studies it vaguely mimics, and they're like, you weirdos go over there, and like we'll give you 1% of the budget and shut up.
Yeah, well, I think that like for a long time the study of animals was always, well, not always, but a lot of the time it was about like their utility to us. And when we talk about behavior or relationships, I think there are still some people who view that as like that's an experience us as humans are having that's independent of the animal, so therefore it's like a human thing, when in reality any animal person can tell you like this is a two-way street.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you establish a connection with the animal that you're in a consult with? Are they often with you in the room? If not, how do people like kind of introduce their animals to you, and then how do you establish a connection with that animal to do your readings?
Yeah, so I work with most of my clients over Zoom or phone. So usually as I'm talking to my human client, I can kind of feel the animals in the background. When it gets time, we do our introductions, and they'll tell me their animals' names and species. That's like the information that I ask for. When it gets time to really bring the animal forward, I'll just make sure that my mind is really clear. And usually by then they're coming in on their own. Like I can hear them, or I'm feeling the information coming through already. If I ever have like a hard time, like say it's an animal that is reluctant to connect, or maybe I had a weird day earlier and I'm not super grounded. Sometimes I'll ask to see a picture or just put the animal on screen, but it's pretty rare that happens, honestly. Usually just from talking to my human clients, I can kind of feel them like trickling in.
Right.
And it's kind of like background noise where if they're really loud, I actually have to tell them, I'm like, okay, you need to step back so I can listen to your human for a minute. But usually they're like somewhere hanging out and kind of ready. And honestly, usually my human clients have been talking to the animal and they're like, we're going to talk to Lily. So they're like ready. The animals are ready to kind of connect. So that's how I do it. Everyone who reads for animals is different. I know that, every reader is different. Just like how every human and every animal is unique, every reader connects differently. I know a lot of people can get there right away just by looking at the photo. For me, the name always helps. Mm-hmm. The name helps me, especially if I'm working with people who have like 20 animals that they're super close with. Like they have childhood animals and other animals who passed away and 10 living animals in their life. Like the name helps me like make sure I'm talking to the right animal. Because sometimes if there's a lot, it can be that's probably one of the hardest things that I experience is if there's a bunch of animals coming through, just making sure I get the right one.
Well, that's another question I was going to ask you is there kind of like this cacophony of animals trying to talk to you all the time? Like, I don't know if you've seen that old movie Ghost where Whoopi Goldberg is like a medium and there's like 800 people in the room, like dead people waiting to talk to her, and she's like, everybody shut up, and there's just a room full of people. Like, is that what's going on with you?
Yeah, sometimes it is like that. It depends. Like if I'm working full time and I'm, connecting with all my clients, I'm usually pretty tired by the end of the day, and that typically will not happen. But if I take breaks, when I go on vacation, sometimes it is like I can feel them kind of coming through, especially if I've taken like 3 or 4 days off channeling, I can start to feel them coming through. In theory, I'm like supposed to have really good energetic boundaries and like never let an animal come through if I'm not asking them, because that's just good. Like in the world of like energy reading, that's called like energetic hygiene. Like that's good energetic hygiene. But sometimes, if I can feel someone coming in, if I know the person, I'm like, okay, you can come in and say what you need to say. But it's really not like there's like 800 animals at all times just trying to come in. And as long as I'm kind of cognizant of, okay, today I'm really going to take the day off and I'm not going in, I'm going to, just be a human today and not connect with any animals, then they're usually pretty respectful of that. If I tell them like, okay, you're gone now. Time to leave and let me do my thing.
Good. I'm glad nobody's harassing you.
No, animals are like, they're so understanding and compassionate in general that like I don't think they would. I just don't know many animals that would like plow over that boundary if I asked them to take a step back.
That's good. It's good that they're nicer than people. It's not a shock, right? So also I know that you talk to animals who have passed. Is that work any different than when you're talking to animals who are still with us in terms of communicating with them, like finding them in this crowd of animals? Like, how does that go?
It's a little different, mostly in like the subject matter. Like the most difficult thing about working with animals who've passed away is that my human clients are so sad and the animals are so peaceful, and trying to hold space for how sad someone is while also like really reassuring them like your animal's okay and they're happy, and trying to say to someone like they are happy to be in spirit when this human is so heartbroken that their animal is not physically with them. That's probably the hardest part. But I connect the same way I would with with a living animal. I do so I said the information I ask for is their name and their species. I also ask if they're living or in spirit, because if I have an animal come through, like a lot of times people think that the animal just comes through and they're like, this is what I look like and this is how I died. And that's like the way they introduce themselves. But
that's grim.
It's a lot more like conversational than that. So if I have an animal who, has passed away, they might come through by introducing themselves as like the favorite thing that they did with their person. And if I don't know that they're passed away, I could interpret that as like, oh, this animal loves to go out on walks with you. So having the information that they're in spirit helps like contextualize, I guess, the messages that I'm receiving. But other than that, it's all the same. It's just interpreting messages and relaying them.
I totally understand what you're saying about like the animals being peaceful and the people being super sad, but I think that would be so comforting for people to hear that while of course you're still going through your own loss and dealing with your own loss, there's so much guilt associated from pet owners, and it would be so helpful, I think, for people to hear just generally that generally pets are okay and happy is your feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never ever worked with an animal in spirit who was not at peace with what happened at the end of their life. And I've worked with animals who've had really crazy end-of-life experiences. So I can confidently say, I mean, there's very few things in animal communication that I'm like, this applies to every single animal, because they are all individuals. But
sure.
I've never worked with an animal who was upset with the way they passed away, who was upset with how, the decisions that were made at the end of their lives. And that's something like so many humans, especially if you're making the decision about euthanasia, and this is just like part of being human. This isn't a bad thing, I think, but so many people will really agonize over the right time, and they want to maximize the good days and minimize the bad days. And that's something that, like, unless you are God, you cannot look into your crystal ball and say, on this day, this animal will have had every good day they're going to have, and it will only be bad days after here. So people will really struggle with that and carry so much pain over, like, what if I should have waited 72 hours? Or what if the last 12 hours were so horrible that they don't forgive me? And I can say pretty confidently that your animals are at peace with the timing that you let them go if you had to make that decision at the end. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. And I think that's a very, very helpful message for people to hear, because I do think part of the psychological part of the grieving process is that guilt that comes in, right? Because it's part of bargaining for people. Yep. And so there's just so much self-blame, even when people don't have anything to blame themselves for. It just comes in. And I think that's really helpful for people to hear.
100%. It is easier said than done. Yeah. I mean, I lost my little bunny in 2022, and it's the same thing where like I was connecting with him, and the human part of my brain was like, did I make a mistake? Like, did I do something wrong? So I think in some ways it's just part of the process. Like, it is. Like, because we are human, we're going to overanalyze and think about it, and then you like do all that work, and you get to the side where you're like, okay, I know I did everything I needed to do for my animal. Yeah.
Exactly. So what do people normally come to you for? Are there specific things? Is it a lot of people coming to you wanting to know how their pets who have passed are doing? Is it a lot of people trying to get you to help them solve a particular issue? Is it a lot of people just wanting to know how their pets are doing in general? What do you find to be like patterns or trends that your clients come to you for?
Yeah, so it really is just about everything under the sun. Some people will come and they just want to know, hey, is my animal okay? Do they have anything they want me to know? Other people will come with like one really specific behavioral challenge that they're working through. I do a lot of work with people at the end of their animals' lives, so they're want to connect before the animal crosses over. Then I work with a lot of people who had an animal who passed away, and they want to connect with the animal in spirit. So it really is like just about everything. With cats specifically, people with cats will come to me for just about everything. The trends that I see with cats, a lot of times they have two cats that don't get along, and they want to try to reconcile the relationship. A lot of times it's cats that are marking all over the house, and they took them to the vet a million times. The vet says they're fine. A lot of times it's like former feral cats, or even feral people who have outdoor cats. I work with a lot of people who have outdoor cats who want to just support with managing the relationships and make sure everyone's okay. And a lot of like convincing cats to be trapped for their spay and neuters and telling them like, it's gonna suck in the short term, but you will feel so much better afterwards. And I would say another thing with cats that's unique that I see a lot is because of so many cats pass away from either cancer or kidney disease.
Yes.
And those are two things that like usually you can kind of see from a mile away. And I mean, sometimes people will be caring for cats for years knowing that their animal is going to pass away. So I'd say that's a somewhat unique experience, or something I see that's somewhat unique to cats, is people who have all this like anticipatory grief and they know that their cat's going to pass away, but they have all this time between then and now, and they're just like, how the heck do I have a relationship with you knowing that you're going to pass away? So that's another kind of unique thing that's unique to cats.
Right.
I mean, of course, all animals are, you know, a lot of animals, a lot of people who go through the anticipatory grief with other animals, but with cats specifically, I think because those two experiences are so common, it becomes a little bit unique. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. What advice do you have for cat owners who might want to understand or connect with their cats, like sort of on a deeper level? Like, are there any techniques or anything that cat owners can do to sort of enhance their own intuitive connection with their pets? Since you said that we're all kind of doing it here and there, how can people get better at it?
Yeah, like my number one across the board advice to anyone is to talk to your animals, even if you feel crazy. And like we were talking earlier, like a lot of people talk to their animals all day long, but to do it, to talk to them about like, hey, later today I'm gonna put you in your carrier and we're gonna go to the vet and they're gonna poke you and then we're gonna come home. Just talk to them about everything. My second advice would be to practice mindfulness or meditation with your animals. I think that's like the easiest way to kind of open the door to an intuitive relationship, because when your mind is clear, when you're in a space where your mind is clear and you're, you know, feeling really comfortable and grounded, you're kind of creating the conditions for to receive those messages from your animals. So like meditate with your cats, practice mindfulness with your cats, and just kind of see, like, do you feel anything in your body? Do do any words just like pop into your mind? Do any images pop into your mind? And just kind of see like if anything happens when you're really, really intentional about clearing your mind. Because I think, like I've said for as long as I've been doing animal communication that we are all doing animal communication all the time. But if you don't know how to receive and you don't know what it feels like to receive, it's easy to miss it, or it's easy to kind of explain it away, like, oh, I was probably just, you know, thinking that by myself or whatever. But getting into the practice of like really clearing your mind, I think, can absolutely create the conditions for a deeper relationship.
Do you think that's part of why cats seem to love when people do yoga or when people are, you know, meditating and sitting on the ground? I've always found that anytime I'm doing either of those things, our cats will like come up and purr and like just cannot get out of my face.
Yeah, totally. I think cats in general are really, really sensitive, and I think they feel into how we are feeling. And if we're showing up from this place of like, we're really grounded, our mind is clear, we're ready to connect with them, I think, yeah, they're absolutely drawn to that 100%.
So can you share any insights or messages that you have received from cats that have surprised or enlightened you? Is there anything in particular?
Yeah, I just gave a reading to someone the other day it was this guy who is taking care of feral cats outside and kind of working on seeing who can be rehabilitated. I think he'd gotten everyone spayed and neutered and socializing the young ones. And the father of all these cats was struggling with like really, really severe aggression. And this guy had kind of exhausted all his options. The cat really wasn't a candidate for rehoming. And he sadly made the decision to do a behavioral euthanasia. And so the work that I was doing with this guy, you know, was just kind of, he wanted to make sure that the cat was okay with the decision. And I've done a handful of behavioral euthanasia readings, and they're all okay. So anyone who's listening who's had to do a behavioral euthanasia, they're okay with the decision. But this cat was explaining to his human that the life experiences he had had were so traumatic, and he had been in a state of fight or flight from the time he was born, essentially. The only coping mechanism he had was aggression. And he was telling his human that the decision to let him go allowed him to heal on a soul level this really deep-rooted conditioning he developed on Earth about being aggressive. And And in addition to being healing for him as an individual, he said he felt like it was also healing for his kittens because he was really aggressive to his male kittens even after everyone had been neutered and socialized. And he was saying that the decision this guy had made was not only healing for him, but it was also healing for his kittens because those kittens were going to have the opportunity to be socialized in an environment that's a lot safer than how the cat who passed away was socialized. And so he felt like the one decision was kind of had this ripple effect, not just for this individual soul who was now at peace, but for his own kittens, for his partner, for the mom too, because they had kind of a relationship as well. So that was really that was really moving to me. Cats in general are so peaceful about the end of their life, and it's always kind of like a worldview shift to be talking to this animal who's just like, yeah, like death is no big deal. Like it's just gonna kind of take me into what's next. Like that's really moving. But to hear this cat recognize that one decision impacted, 10 or 11 cats' lives was really fascinating to me.
So that actually kind of leads me into some of the questions from the listeners. One person asked, can my pet spirit be reincarnated? Sometimes I feel her energy with my current cat.
Yeah. So I'm not an expert on reincarnation, and I know that there's like varying ideologies out there about reincarnation. My understanding is yes, they can. However, it's less common than people think. So a lot of times people will see their, current animal doing a behavior that their previous animal did all the time, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, that must be them. What comes through in readings more common than reincarnation is the living animal is like channeling for the animal in spirit. So they'll have these moments of like doing a behavior that they like never do, but the other animal did all the time. I do have reincarnation come up sometimes. It's not super common. I see it mostly with animals who passed away really young. Like they'll sort of say like, oh, I didn't finish what I was working on with my humans, I'm coming back. But it's a thing for sure.
Somebody else wanted to know, do all my pets meet each other in heaven? And I know these are very loaded ideas of like reincarnation and heaven, but I think just generally, rather than saying like this Judeo-Christian idea of heaven, like, is there a space where all of this person's pets are? Is
Totally.
That a thing?
Yeah. My understanding is yes, that we are all, like, yes, all of our animals are connected, even the animals who didn't know each other when they were alive. My understanding is that we are all connected before we're born, and we're all connected in spirit together, kind of as like the term people use is like soul family. So my understanding is yes, we're all connected, all your animals are together. Even animals who maybe didn't get along when they were living, that they're in spirit, they're kind of returning to like the most loving, authentic version of themselves, and that they are at peace together in spirit. So yes, that's my understanding.
Okay. Somebody else wanted to know, what signs should you generally look out for from your departed kitties?
Dreams would be a big one. Even if they are scary dreams, a lot of times my understanding is that they will like come through to give us a little message in our dreams, and if we're still processing really traumatic stuff, like our brain will almost like interpret their coming through as something that's really scary. So if you do have nightmares about your animals, anyone like who's listening, I would never ever interpret that as like your animal is not at peace. I really would never interpret it that way, because I've never worked with an animal who wasn't at peace in spirit. So dreams, also like coming up with, if there's a lyric of a song or a color that you associate with that animal, and then kind of like telling them like, okay, I really think of you every time I hear this or whatever. Odds are that they already sent that message to you, but I think establishing it can be really cool. It's always cool, like when I have clients who will, like, I'll tell the animal like, give your human a really, really big sign after this reading because they're so sad, and then they'll like message me and be like, oh my God, right after we got off the call, this song came on the radio. So signs and dreams. Another big one with the cats is that they'll actually send like physical sensations. So they'll send like jumping up on the furniture, like if you feel something jumping up next to you, or the dogs will like breathe hot breath on the back of your legs sometimes. So yeah, physical sensations too, stuff to look out for.
Okay. There's a lot of questions from people who are clearly going through grief.
That's okay.
Okay. So do our pets come back to visit us after they have passed? I think you've sort of answered this, but...
Yeah. It depends on the animal. Some of them are super active in the space and will like interact with your other animals, will interact with you. Other animals will kind of support you more from their position in spirit. So it depends on the animal, but yes, if stuff is happening in your house, if you're, seeing an outline of them on your bed or whatever, like yes, that is most likely them interacting with you.
Okay. And what is a good way to honor a pet that has passed?
Biggest thing, like when I ask animals, what they want from their humans, the biggest thing is that they want us to feel supported. So this is kind of an annoying answer, but my annoying answer is if it makes you feel connected to them, you're probably making your animal happy because that's what they want. They want us to feel close and connected to them. They don't have big opinions about what you do with their stuff or even what you do with their body. So whatever makes you feel the most connected to them, that's typically what they want. Every now and then I'll have an animal who has like really specific requests, but usually it's more about, it's something that like they had talked about or their human had talked about with them that they kind of want to lift up. So that's my like choose your own adventure answer. For people who are like, I don't know what makes me feel close to them. People have had a lot of success with physical objects that you can actually hold and touch. I think that's something that people who are really in the thick of their grief, if they want, they want to have that connection, but they're just like really missing the physical absence, either having like a photo that they always touch or a stuffed animal that looks like the animal or a stone that they associate with the animal. That can be, I think, really supportive to people. I think pictures can be really supportive too as a way to memorialize them, especially because pets, so much of their life and like what they bring to us is just like how cute they are and how like good looking they are. But having like those physical representations of like, hey, maybe your body was thin or uncomfortable at the end of your life. Maybe you looked different than you did for most of your life, but now I'm gonna have these pictures of how beautiful you were when you were healthy and how vibrant, and that's really embodying like the essence of what you brought into this life. So yeah, those are kind of my like ideas for anyone who doesn't even know where to start. But I would say in general, if you feel supported, if you feel close to your animal will support it, because that's their goal once they're in spirit, is to support you and feel close to you from their position in spirit.
That makes sense. Someone else wanted to know, are there any ways I can connect with my senior cat to find out what's ailing her? How can I help, etc.? I'm assuming, aside from making an appointment with you, is there anything they can do on their own that you would recommend?
With senior, I think anything that can support mobility that's something that comes up a lot in readings, like making sure that there's good traction around the house, and even like for cats and dogs, the like texture changes on the floor can be really difficult for them. So if you have a part that goes from carpet to hardwood, maybe throwing a yoga mat down to kind of help support mobility as they're getting older. But honestly, just like, again, annoying answer, but just like spending time with them. Like that's what your animals care about more than really most things we worry about. They care about spending time with us and connecting with us. So even if I always tell people, like, even if you're just like looking at your phone next to your animal, if you have that time to be together and just kind of share space with each other, I think that can be really powerful too.
Yeah, I agree, especially with cats. Like just sharing space quietly is so valuable to them. Like that's their love language, is like being butt to butt with each other. Just quietly sitting around. So someone else wanted to know what things they do that annoy their cats. So are there generally things that people do that you've heard over the years that are irritating to cats?
The most common things that come up is like random household noises. So your Ring doorbell alarm, going on your phone. A lot of animals don't like dishes clanging together. So like if you're putting the dishes in. A lot of animals just don't like sounds from the kitchen in general, like the sizzling of, veggies or whatever on the stove. That can be irritating to them. So obviously you can't just like stop living your life in your home.
Yeah.
Being cognizant of those sounds that to your cats might seem really unpredictable or sudden. Another one that comes up a lot is that they get annoyed that their humans are always waking them up. So like if animals are like resting, in one part of the house, and you keep walking over and like petting them or taking pictures, sometimes they'll be like, let me rest. Also, like unpredictability can be frustrating to them. So if your routine is really unpredictable, again, this is all within the context of what you can do as a human being in life. Obviously, there's times that things are going to be unpredictable, but they seem to really like, the cats especially seem to really like when their routine is predictable, when they know what's going to happen next throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Cats love a routine, and they love to stick to a routine, and they don't like any deviation from the routine. So totally get that. And one of the last questions from listeners is, are my cats happy generally with their feline siblings? Like if you talk to people who have multi-cat households, is there a lot of friction there? And I know this is like an individual case-by-case basis, but generally are cats annoyed by living with other cats, or are they happy with them?
Again, it totally depends.
Yes.
I would say from the cats I read for, most of the littermates are fine, that they're pretty comfortable with each other. Probably the biggest factor that I feel from cats when they talk about what's working, what's not working with other cats is space. So if you like live in like a one bedroom and you're trying to decide if you should bring in your fourth cat, like maybe wait until you have a little bit more space for everyone to spread out and kind of have, to me, it's like they use space as a way to communicate with one another. And when they don't have space to like diffuse that tension, that's when problems can become really challenging for them. So I would say it completely depends. From what I read for, it seems like the littermates seem to have more success than the cats who were not born and raised together. But even then, sometimes I read for multi-cat households, they'll have like 7 cats in one house and they're all chilling and all doing fine. So I'd say it really depends on the individual. I would be cognizant of space in your house and making sure there's just room for everyone to like diffuse tension if they are communicating with each other that way. But I'd say it depends. Does that make sense?
No, that totally makes sense. And I think good advice for people who are listening who do have multi-cat households like us. We have 11 cats. So we have a lot of cats. A lot of cats. We have a big space, thankfully. We left our tiny apartment and now have a large space. But environmental stimulation is super important. So things like high perches, like never have a place where cats can come around a corner and be face to face, and surprise each other. Lots of hiding spaces, lots of places for them to run and get all that energy out, and a lot of playtime so that you're playing with them to exhaustion. All of that is super important for them to maintain a happy household where everybody gets along. Yes. Yeah. Have you ever encountered like a challenge or an obstacle when you're trying to connect with a cat in like a client session?
Yeah, the biggest challenge with cats probably is just like helping humans understand the way cats perceive the world, because there's so many things that for us as humans we look at and we're like it would change my life if you just peed in the litter box. It would change my life if you just weren't bullying the other animals. Like we look at it and we're like, it would be so simple to just stop doing those behaviors. But for cats, really all animals, but cats, because we're talking about them, the way they view their world, a lot of those behaviors are like non-negotiable. Like they're communicating something, and it's not as simple as just stop doing that. So that's probably the biggest challenge I have, is when I work with people who are like at their wits' end, they're like, I've done everything and they're still doing this behavior, helping them understand that like for your cats, they're not waking up and making the decision to make your life harder. It's not as simple as just stopping because that behavior for them is serving a purpose. And helping people understand that when they're in a situation where they are exhausted and they've tried everything and they feel like there's nothing more that they can do to help.
Right. That makes sense. So when you are working on a case like that, and this is just for my own interest, but when you are working on a case of like, let's say inappropriate toileting or whatever in a cat, do you have follow-up with that person? Like, do you find out if your interventions are able to be successful or not? Like, how does that end up working out? I'm just curious for me.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the client. I've gotten like a decent amount of feedback that like, oh, whatever, that was supportive to them, and now they're, the behavior is. Every now and then I'll get like, oh, the behavior changed overnight, which is awesome, and that makes me so happy. What happens more often is they're like, slowly over time, we tried some of the things that you suggested, and like now we're starting to see improvements. I can kind of tell by the end of the reading, like sometimes I work with cats who they are so like, either the human client is saying, oh, there's nothing more I can do, like this is the last chance and they better stop the behavior.
That's never a good attitude.
Which in those times I'm like, I'm telling the cat like, okay, this is really serious. Usually I can tell by the end of the reading if I think the cat is gonna make it in terms of stopping the behavior or the behavior. So usually I can kind of tell, and it's not like a total surprise who I hear back from, but I'd say it just depends. It depends both on the individual animal and definitely the humans, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note that like changing cat behaviors is not a one-way street, right? Like it's very much work between the human and the cat. And there's always a role that people have to play in terms of modifying our own behavior or the environment that the cats have. We have 100%. To also play our own part in that. What advice or thoughts do you have for cat owners who may be kind of skeptical about the idea of animal intuitives or communicating with their pets in this way? You can also just be like, well, continue having your skepticism, like whatever. Like it's not your job to, tell people that they have to believe in this. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts. Yeah.
My initial thought is like don't book a reading. Like it's cool.
Yeah, fair, totally fair. Yes, that's not your job.
I think that there's like two types of skeptics. I think there's people who are like, that is stupid. Fundamentally, I'm not interested in that, which is cool. Animal communication is a tool. It's like, it's a tool in your toolkit, and if you don't find value in the tool, then like, that's fine. You can still have the incredible relationships with your animals without animal communication. In my mind, I'm like, you're doing animal communication anyway, whether you believe it or not, but cool if that's just something that fundamentally you're not interested in. What I see more with my clients is people who are they're really interested, they really want to believe, but they're having a hard time like getting there conceptually. Right. And I empathize with that. I really empathize with people who they don't want to invest the money if they don't know if this is real. So what I would say to those people is to honestly like sit with your animals, like meditate with your cats, practice mindfulness with your cats, get to a place where you are really, really clear-headed, and then just start talking to them and see what happens. See if you feel something in your body, if an image pops into your mind, just see. I think that that's the risk that you're not spending money, you're not investing financially in something that you're not sure about. You're just sitting with them and seeing. And if you have an experience where you're like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can explain that, then I think that can help put some chips in the trust bank of the concept of animal communicators. And what I say, like when I teach animal communication, what I always say to my students is the worst case scenario is you sat with your animals for 30 minutes and nothing happened. And then you'll walk away feeling more grounded, more mindful, and your animals will have spent 30 minutes of uninterrupted time with you. And how often do we get to do that in one go? So that's what I would say to people who are like, I don't know if I want to put my money there. Totally fine, totally valid, but see if you can have any experiences on your own that can kind of introduce the world to you or change the world of animal communication or change, your understanding of animal communication. I think that can help before taking the jump to actually spending your hard-earned money, right. Which I completely understand.
I think that was such a great answer.
Oh, thank you.
That was a really, really, really good answer. Are there any common misconceptions that people have about cats that your intuitive insights have helped dispel? Can you think of anything?
Yeah, there's a couple. The first, like, kind of stereotypical thing people say about cats is, like, cats, you have to earn their love, and dogs just give love unconditionally. Mm-hmm. In my experience, that's kind of a oversimplification of both dogs and cats. I really feel that cats when they love you, that love is unconditional, and their relationship with you is unconditional. And I also feel like dogs, they're more complicated than just loving people unconditionally. So that's probably the biggest one, is people like, I think that there are individual cats who would like to see that you are a respectful person before opening up to you. Absolutely. But I also think there's dogs who do that too. I think that we are, like, there's humans who do that too. And then there's also cats who will like sit in the lap of anyone who will give them attention because they value that human connection so highly. So I think that's a misconception I see. Another one is people will, with vocalizing especially, a lot of people will come to me and say like, oh, my cat screams at me for no reason. There's always a reason. There's always a reason. They're not just like hearing their own voice. So that's another one that comes up a lot in readings.
So are there certain behaviors or signals that cats use to communicate with humans that we often overlook or misinterpret? Like, are cats doing things that like we think mean one thing or that we just don't pay attention to, and then when you're talking to them in a reading, they're like, I keep doing this thing and my person's not getting it? Like,
vocalizing is a big one,
right?
I would say.
What do you find that vocalizing typically means or is for? Like, are there certain things that you see over and over the cats are vocalizing for?
Sometimes it's food.
Yeah, that's fair.
A lot of times, though, it's anxiety, or like that they're anticipating something anxiety-inducing is going to happen next. So I'll see that a lot. People will say like, oh, when I'm getting ready for the day, my cat's always just screaming the whole time. And a lot of times they'll say that they're anticipating their human leaving and that makes them feel anxious. So yeah, I would say, from what I see in readings, it ranges from like, I want that food, give that to me now, to like, I'm having a hard time, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable.
Right. And if you're working with a cat who has anxiety like that, are you able to work with them to kind of reduce that anxiety? Do you ever recommend that, they use kind of like a psychopharmacological intervention? Like, how do you handle cat anxiety with your clients?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the client and the animal, because some people will just ask me outright, like, hey, we started this medicine, how do they feel? And then I just ask them, or I ask them like, hey, are you open? If the human wants to know, they're maybe interested in trying that, I'll just ask the animal, like, are you open to trying this? It might make you feel a little bit more relieved, whatever. Some people are just like totally not open to that at all, which for the scope of what I do, I'm not interested in like changing anyone's mind with that. That's between them and their vet and the other people that they hire to help with their animals. So if they're not open to it at all, I kind of just work within, what's possible for the animal. So a lot of times I'll start with just explaining to the animal, like, hey, your human's going to come back, or whatever the thing that's making them anxious. If strangers are coming into the home, they will never hurt you. Your human will never let someone unkind come into your space. So I usually start there with just like explaining. Usually they're like, yeah, I know, my human tells me that every day, but I still feel anxious. So then I kind of go from there, like, okay, is there anything your humans can do that will help you feel better with these feelings? And sometimes they'll have ideas that are just like totally not possible. Like a very common answer is they'll say, okay, just never leave the house ever again. Never be away from me ever again. So that's not possible. So then I kind of go back to the animal and say, that's not possible because X, Y, Z. That's one of like my favorite things to do in readings, is like negotiating between the animal and the human. Like, right. What is the human capable of doing or willing to do? What does the animal want? Where can we find a middle ground? Most times there is a middle ground, with the exception of animals who are like totally on one end of the spectrum, like they have maybe really severe issue that is outside of the scope of animal communication, or a human who is, like we're talking about, kind of fixed in what they're willing to do for the animal. Usually there's middle ground somewhere.
Can you share a particularly memorable or surprising experience you've had when communicating with a cat?
Yeah, I've got two more like cat stories that like sit in the back of my brain all the time. So one, I do some missing animal work, and I was reading for someone whose cat had been missing for a couple of days, and she was like really, of course, just like worried sick about her cat. And and I connected with him, and I could tell he was alive and doing pretty well, and I was kind of like, what are you doing, dude? And he was like, I'm having this awesome adventure. I've done all these things. And I told him, I was like, hey, like, you're a human, like, can't eat, can't sleep, like, your human is not doing well. Like, if you know where you are, you need to come home right now. And I could tell he was like asking, he was like, is she doing this behavior that she does when she's really anxious? And I was like, gosh, like, she's not feeling well. So he kind of like, I could tell he was like thinking about it, and he was like weighing the discomfort that he was causing versus the like enthusiasm he had for his journey. And literally the next day she's like, he came home. So I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he knew where he was the whole time. So that, I think about that a lot. I also think about just like how traumatic cats' lives are a lot. I mean, all animals are subject to their own like unique type of mistreatment, but cats especially, I feel, face so much hardship. Like with the clients that I read for, the cat's trauma seems to be so much more concentrated versus I'll read for, you know, a dog who's had wonderful experiences one day, and then the next day maybe a rescue who's had less than ideal experiences. Cats, it's like almost every single one has a story to tell about something messed up they experienced. But even like I see like memes and stuff like about like, oh, this is my dog that I paid like $2,000 for and I was on a wait list, and this is my cat that I got out of the garbage.
Yeah.
And so, like the cat redistribution system, but those like memes are only available to us because it's true that like cats are so frequently and readily discarded. And it's true that yes, all animals face that, but I think cats in particular, probably because they reproduce so quickly, that's probably why so many cats have had really like insane life stories. But that's something that I think about a lot, about just like so many cats that I read for have really, really painful stories to tell about either being discarded or being, you know, growing up having a mom that was feral, and the social implications of that have changed their life forever. Like there's just so many crazy things that cats go through. I don't even know where I'm going with this. I just went on a tangent about how traumatic cats lives are. But
I get it.
That's something I think about a lot. Or cats that will talk about being kittens and having to fight to survive, like being really, really young cats. So those are things that stick with me, I would say, in terms of like memorable reading.
Sure.
Is the hardships that cats face, and how there is some, well, yes, all animals are subject to mistreatment. There's some unique qualities, I think, to what so many cats experience. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense, and I think it makes sense in the scope of the fact that we domesticated dogs thousands and thousands of years ago, right? And cats sort of domesticated themselves. But still, I think a lot of people consider them wild in some sense, and so people feel like they can just put them back in the forest or put them out of the house whenever, have these indoor-outdoor cats who end up getting in fights or not spay-neuter their cats, and it's fine to let their cats just get pregnant all the time or go out and make babies. And I think that's obviously very problematic for a lot of the reasons that you've listed.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that, I mean, we're really only in the dog world, only really just beginning to have widespread knowledge of like socialization, like why it's important for these puppies to have proper socialization. With cats, it's like, of course, there's people like you and probably people who listen to this who are there in terms of their understanding, but there is still so much, I think, just lack of knowledge about what it means to really tend to these animals in a way that is worthy of the species. You know what I mean? I
agree, and I think there's a lack of knowledge about just what a healthy and happy cat looks like, right? And I think a lot of people are like, oh, I have this cat and it just hangs out under the bed all day and it doesn't like being pet, but that's just what cats do. And in fact, that's not what a happy and healthy cat does or looks like or acts like. But I think there's just this idea kind of out in the ether that, you know, cats are weird and they don't like people and, you know, they just do what they want. And that's not true.
And I think it'll change. I mean, obviously with the work you do, I think that people are becoming more and more aware, and people just like, they care, I think, more than than probably in the past. I think generally speaking, people care.
So my last question for you, you can decide how or even if you want to answer this, but this is a question from all of our cat Steve's followers. They just want to know, how is Steve? And you can answer this in a very general way because I'm not paying you for a reading. So however you want to answer this for them, or you can just say, I'm not going to answer this because this isn't, my time.
I've got him. He's got a couple things. He's also just saying that at the time that your wife got a reading, he says that you were like, it was so painful for you. Like, it was just so painful for you to think about connecting with him in this way. I feel like too, there might have been some like fear of, I don't know, like what if I don't feel close to him afterwards, or what if I don't feel like this was from him. So he says when he was living, he knows that so much of his purpose was both in your family with you, but also with this like broader audience he has. I don't know if when he was living he like totally had a concept of like Instagram, but I think he felt the love and the energy of these people who were supporting him. So he says when he was living, he really felt like, almost especially towards the end of his life, he felt like conviction about spreading this message of just like education, but also showing people like how cool cats can be, like just showing not just your family and the friends of your family, but like other humans that like cats are really cool and you can have these really cool relationships with them. He says that since he's passed away, he does feel less like personally connected to his audience and more connected to your family. He feels like the work that you're doing with his audience is almost like you're sharing him to continue to support people rather than him directly supporting people, because he says since he's passed away, it's been like all hands on deck. Like he's needed to support his family and send, love and reassurance and support to you guys as you're navigating what's like really broken hearts. So I think that's just him basically saying to his fans like, hey, I receive your love, I feel your love, and my relationship with my humans is like priority in this position and spirit. It is important to him. I mean, he says that you're continuing to share and continuing to educate, and that like that's really the legacy of his life, is this long-lasting relationship with people who were invested and who he reminded them of their cats and he reminded them of their relationships with animals. So he seems comfortable with that being his legacy, but I think that's just him. That's just his like way of recognizing the way that his things have shifted since he's passed away. He is saying that a lot of his purpose towards the end of his life was to help really support to help other people kind of learn about grief, and I feel like just animal death in general, and how there isn't like a clear cut. He says it with him at the end of his life, it wasn't like a linear, like you knew that the day after today is going to be harder than the day we just lived, and so that he feels like part of his purpose was in kind of sharing that knowledge, not just with you and your family, but also with his following. And he's also just saying that he kind of like was, I don't know if he was like your first cat or first cat as an adult, but he says that he was like the beginning of this like really life-changing relationship with the cats that you've had. And I think he feels like his purpose was to kind of light the match that led to this long-lasting relationship that both you and I feel your wife too have with the cats. I mean, he says that what he brought into the world was the beginning of this really, really deep, long-lasting relationship that your family has been able to create with the cats. Yeah, so that's his biggest thing. So he's saying hi to his fans. Saying, like, hey, his relationship with you is definitely priority at this point in spirit. He says he's grateful for the opportunities and the experiences. This is the other thing. He's saying that he is saying that he was a little bit unique in that I feel like he's saying that like he met a lot of people who were like, oh, I don't like cats, but this one's cool, and that his job was to like show people. Like the way he's describing it is like, oh, that's like a dog in a cat body, and he's like, cats are
that's
amazing.
Exactly it. That's exactly what people always said, and people would always be like, I don't like cats, but I like this cat, and this cat's like a dog. Yeah.
He's sort of like, he's like, all cats are great, and we don't have to be compared to dogs in order to be like valid cats. But there's a little bit of like attitude about that, but I think what's bigger than that is he knows that that was an educational experience for people who maybe thought that they didn't like cats or thought that they had whatever, like preconceived ideas about what cats are supposed to be like. So even though there is a little bit of like, cats are cool too, we don't have to be compared to dogs in order to be worthy. I think he does feel that for some people, if that's where they're beginning with their relationship with cats, it can feel supportive to them to be like, oh, this cat is different because he is friendly or curious or whatever, and that makes him therefore somehow better than other cats. If that's where they're starting from, he's like, whatever, that's fine. If that's where they need to start in order to realize that cats are like super cool and have so much to offer. So that was the last little ditty from him.
I mean, he did also love dogs, so to everybody and every animal. So
he actually feels like, as you were mourning him, that like part of it was he feels from you specifically, and you can like cut this out if you don't want other people to, I don't know. He feels that he felt you struggle with like, oh, I'll never have a cat who I feel disconnected to, or who brings this unique energy into my life. And it's almost like he's reminding you too that like, yes, it's a unique relationship, and yes, you will never have a relationship like that again because it was unique, and that you can also have amazing, unique relationships with other cats because they are all individuals. They all bring something special into your life. And he knows you know that, but I think because there was such a connection there, and because he brought just, not just his, the physical presence of his relationship into your life, but like all these incredible, like human relationships, he says, he just like connected everyone in your world. I think he knows that there was some grief about like, oh, it's not just that you're leaving me, it's this whole chapter that you brought into my life that is leaving as well. And he's saying, of course, it's never left you because he's always been with you, and look at the legacy that he's been able to create because of that relationship with you.
Ugh, man, you got me. It's hard. He was and is my soulmate, so it's very hard. Still 7 months out dealing with this. Okay, well, thank you for answering that question. So thank you so much, Lilly. How can people contact you if they would like to avail themselves of your services?
Totally, yeah. Well, you can find me on Instagram at, it's kind of long, Lil Ludwig _animal intuitive. I'm also on TikTok at Lil Ludwig, just Lil Ludwig. These are things I didn't think about when I started my business, that like keeping everything, or my website, which is lilludwiganimalintuitive.com. I post lots of free animal communication goodies on my social media, or you can book a reading. I'm teaching an animal communication class in May if anyone wants to try it out for themselves. Or just go sit and meditate with your animals for free and enjoy that as well, because I have a feeling if you try it out, you might be surprised what comes through. So go for it.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and all of your valuable information and insights as I lose the ability to talk. And just thank you so much for everything. This was so interesting.
You are very welcome. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
You're so welcome, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to book a cat behavior appointment with me, you can go to my website, catitudeadjustment.com. If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Instagram at Hiss and Tell Podcast and on Facebook at Hiss and Tell Podcast. If you like this episode and the podcast in general, please go ahead and give us a rating and leave a review. That would help us out so much. Thanks to Cat Beats for providing this music.